Is this some kind of joke, or did the retirement home bus break down on the active flight line? Captain Ryan Miller barked the question across the shimmering heat of the tarmac, his voice dripping with the kind of arrogance that only came from being young, promoted fast, and currently bored. He adjusted his sunglasses, staring down the elderly man standing near the nose of the AH-64 Apache. Fred Patterson, 72 years old and wearing a red leather jacket that had seen better decades, didn't flinch. He didn't even turn his head immediately. He stood with his hands clasped loosely behind his back, his posture deceptively relaxed, studying the sensor array on the helicopter's nose. The desert wind whipped his thinning gray hair, but his eyes, deep-set and calm, remained fixed on the machine. "You hearing me, old-timer?" Miller shouted, stepping closer, his boots crunching loudly on the grit. Behind him, two other junior officers, Lieutenant Evans and Warrant Officer Davis, exchanged amused smirks. This was the highlight of their afternoon shift, harassing a confused civilian who had clearly wandered past the security checkpoint. "I heard you, Captain," Fred said softly. His voice was gravel, worn smooth by time, carrying a resonance that didn't match his frail appearance. "I was just admiring the bird. She's running a little heavy on the hydraulic fluid near the front strut, isn't she?" Miller stopped a few feet away, crossing his arms over his chest. He laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed off the metal fuselage. "Oh, we've got an expert here. You hear that, Evans? He thinks he knows the maintenance schedule." Miller leaned in, invading Fred's personal space. "This is a restricted military zone. That means no tourists, no birdwatchers, and definitely no wandering geriatrics looking for a nostalgia trip. Let's see some ID before I have the MPs drag you out of here." Fred reached into his back pocket slowly, telegraphing every move so as not to spook the aggressive young officer. He pulled out a worn leather wallet and extracted a visitor's pass, handing it over. It was valid, stamped earlier that morning by base command, but Miller barely glanced at it before flicking it back at Fred's chest. The laminate card fluttered to the ground. "That's a visitor pass for the museum complex," Miller lied, though he hadn't even read the clearance code. "This is the flight line. Active duty personnel only. You're trespassing on federal property, and you're touching millions of dollars of government hardware." "I wasn't touching," Fred said, bending down to retrieve his pass with a stiff grimace of pain. "I was listening." "Listening," Miller scoffed, looking back at his cronies. "He thinks the helicopter talks to him. That's precious. Look, Pops, why don't you shuffle back to your car before you hurt yourself? These machines are for warriors, not for old men who used to change spark plugs on a Buick in 1970. Fred straightened up, dusting off the pass. He looked at the Apache, then at Miller. There was no anger in his eyes, just a pity that irritated Miller more than shouting would have. "It's a longbow," Fred said. "Block 3 upgrades, but you've got a vibration in the tail rotor assembly. I can hear the harmonic dissonance even while it's sitting cold. The tension on the pitch links is off." Miller's face reddened. He stepped forward, poking a finger into Fred's shoulder. "You listen to me. I fly this bird. I know every bolt, every rivet, and every wire in her gut. I don't need a senile old man telling me about pitch links. You think you know so much. You think because you watched a few war movies you understand what this beast is." Fred remained silent, his gaze steady. Miller grinned, a cruel idea forming in his mind. He wanted to humiliate this intruder, to prove a point to his subordinates about the gap between civilians and the elite. He gestured grandly toward the cockpit. "Tell you what, Ace, since you're such an expert, why don't you climb up there?" Evans chuckled nervously. "Sir, maybe we should just call security." No, Miller waved him off, his eyes locked on Fred. "I want to see this. I want to see him try to even get his foot in the stirrup without breaking a hip. Go on, old man. You say the pitch links are off? Go start her up. Spin the blades. Let's see if you can even figure out how to turn on the battery." It was a dare, a taunt meant to end in embarrassment. Miller expected the old man to back down, to mutter an apology and retreat, or even better, to try and fail, slipping off the step or staring blankly at the complex array of switches in the cockpit. Fred looked at the captain, then up at the cockpit. The canopy was open, the seat beckoned. For a second, the heat of the day seemed to vanish. The sounds of the bass faded. Fred looked at his own hands. They were wrinkled, spotted with age, and slightly trembling. "You want me to start the aircraft, Captain?" Fred asked quietly. "I'm ordering you to," Miller mocked. "Consider it a field test. If you can get those blades spinning, I'll personally drive you to the mess hall and buy you a steak. If you can't, or if you sit there looking stupid, you're going to jail for trespassing and wasting an officer's time." Fred took a breath. The air smelled of JP-8 fuel and hot asphalt. It was the smell of his youth, the smell of his life. He nodded once. "All right," Fred said. He walked to the side of the fuselage. Miller and the others watched, arms crossed, waiting for the stumble. Fred reached up, grabbing the handhold. It was a long reach. He pulled. His shoulder protested, a sharp bite of arthritis, but the muscle memory took over. He placed his foot in the step, hauled himself up, and swung his leg over. He moved with a surprising fluid economy. It wasn't the athletic bound of a 20-year-old, but it was the practiced, efficient climb of someone who had done this motion 10,000 times. Miller's smirk faltered slightly. He had expected the old man to need help or to give up. Instead, Fred was already settling into the rear pilot's seat. "He's actually doing it," Evans whispered. "Sir, isn't this against regulation?" "Relax," Miller snapped, though his own voice lacked its previous confidence. "He'll stare at the panel for 10 seconds, realize it looks like a spaceship, and climb down crying. He doesn't know the sequence. You can't just turn a key." Fred sat in the seat. It felt different than the models he had flown in his prime. The cushions were new, the digital displays replaced some of the analog gauges, but the geometry was the same. The cyclic stick was exactly where his right hand remembered it. The collective was waiting for his left. He closed his eyes for a split second. A flash of green jungle canopy raced through his mind. The thumping rhythm of rotors overhead, the smell of cordite and sweat. He remembered the feeling of the machine wrapping around him like a suit of armor. He wasn't Fred Patterson, the retiree with a bad back anymore. He was part of the sky. Across the tarmac, about 200 yards away, Chief Warrant Officer 5 Jefferson was walking toward the hangar with a clipboard. He stopped. He saw the group of officers clustered around the Apache, and he saw the red leather jacket in the cockpit. He squinted against the glare. "What in the hell?" Jefferson muttered. He raised his hand to shield his eyes. He recognized the posture of the man in the seat, the way the head tilted, checking the overhead panel. Jefferson had seen that silhouette in old training films and dusty photographs in the base archives. Jefferson dropped his clipboard. He grabbed the radio clip to his shoulder. "Base Ops, this is Chief Jefferson. Get me the Colonel. Now, urgent." The radio crackled. "Chief, the Colonel is in a briefing with I don't care if he's with the President." Jefferson roared, breaking into a run toward the flight line. "You put him on. Tell him the ghost is in the seat. Tell him Miller is baiting Fred Patterson." Inside the cockpit, Fred opened his eyes. He didn't look at Miller down on the ground. He looked at the instrument panel. It was dark. "Battery on," he whispered to himself. His hand moved. It didn't search. It didn't waver. It snapped to the overhead switch panel. Click. The screens flickered to life. The caution lights illuminated, a Christmas tree of amber and red that would have terrified a novice. Fred scanned them in a heartbeat, categorizing, dismissing, verifying. Down on the ground, Miller jumped as the navigation lights flashed on. He found the battery, Evans said. "Lucky guess," Miller muttered, stepping closer. "Hey, that's enough. You made your point. Get down." Fred didn't hear him. He was in the sequence. A PU, auxiliary power unit. His thumb found the switch. He engaged it. A high-pitched whine began to emanate from the engine cowling, rising steadily in pitch like a screaming tea kettle. The sound cut through the heavy air. It was the sound of a beast waking up. Miller's eyes widened. That wasn't a guess. Starting the APU required a specific set of checks. The old man was pressurizing the systems. "Turn it off," Miller shouted, waving his arms. "You're going to break it. Get out of that cockpit right now." Fred ignored the frantic figure dancing on the tarmac. He checked the engine oil pressures on the multifunction display. Good. Hydraulics. Good. He looked at the rotor brake. Engaged. He placed his hand on the ignition switches. Inside the base headquarters, Colonel Vance stood up so fast his chair tipped over. The voice on the phone was shouting, "Patterson? You're sure it's Patterson?" "Yes, sir." Chief Jefferson was breathless on the line. "Captain Miller is down there hazing him." He dared him to start the bird. "The APU is spinning up right now." "God help us," Vance whispered. He didn't grab his hat. He didn't grab his jacket. He ran for the door. "Get the MPs. Clear the tarmac. If Miller touches him, I'll court-martial him into the Stone Age." Back on the flight line, the noise was becoming deafening. The APU was at full scream. The heat blur behind the exhaust was visible. Miller was panic-stricken. He realized too late that he had made a catastrophic error. This wasn't a confused old man. This was someone who knew exactly what they were doing, and Miller had just unauthorized a civilian to start a lethal weapon of war. If that helicopter moved, Miller's career wasn't just over. He was going to prison. "Evans, get up there and pull him out." Miller screamed over the whine. I'm not going near those intakes. Evans yelled back, backing away. Miller lunged for the step, intending to drag Fred out by his collar. Just as his boot hit the metal, Fred released the rotor brake and advanced the power lever for engine 1. The engine caught with a thunderous whump. A blast of hot exhaust hit Miller, knocking him off balance. He stumbled back, shielding his face. Slowly, heavily, the massive composite blades above began to turn. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. They gathered speed. The shadow of the blades flickered over Miller's terrified face. The second engine caught. The whine deepened into a roar, a rhythmic thumping that vibrated in the chest of every man on the ground. The downwash began to kick up dust, stinging Miller's eyes, whipping his perfectly pressed uniform into disarray. Fred sat calm in the eye of the storm. He watched the TGT turbine gas temperature. He watched the torque. He synchronized the engines. His hands danced over the controls, adjusting, tweaking, feeling the machine settle into its idle rhythm. The Apache was alive. It strained against the wheel chocks, a predator ready to hunt. Miller was shouting, but his voice was swallowed by the hurricane. He was backing away, terror in his eyes, realizing he had lost all control of the situation. He looked like a child standing in front of a locomotive. Then the cavalry arrived. 3 Humvees and a staff car screeched onto the tarmac, lights flashing. They skidded to a halt 50 yards away, avoiding the rotor arc. MPs poured out, weapons drawn but pointed at the ground, unsure of the threat. Colonel Vance burst out of the lead car. He ran toward Miller, ignoring the dust and the noise. He grabbed Miller by the vest and dragged him back, away from the aircraft. "What have you done?" Vance screamed into Miller's face, his voice barely audible over the rotors. "He's hijacking it," Miller yelled back, desperate to spin the narrative. "He's crazy." He jumped in and started it. Vance shoved Miller away with a look of pure disgust. He turned to the helicopter. The blades were spinning at full flight idle now, a blur of gray. The sound was a steady, powerful beat that resonated in the bones. Vance didn't order the MPs to storm the cockpit. He walked forward, alone. He walked right up to the nose of the aircraft, fighting the wind. He looked up into the cockpit. Fred looked down. He saw the rank on the collar. A full-bird colonel. Fred's hand moved to the power levers. He didn't pull pitch. He didn't try to take off. He simply held the aircraft steady, showing the colonel that he had total control. Vance raised his hand. He didn't wave for Fred to get out. He brought his hand up to the brim of his cap in a sharp, crisp salute. He held it there, rigid, respectful, honoring the man in the glass bubble. Fred held the colonel's gaze. He nodded slowly. Then, with the same methodical grace he had used to start it, he began the shutdown sequence. He cut the fuel to engine 1. The noise dropped, then engine 2. The roar faded to a whine. He applied the rotor brake. The blades slowed, turning from a blur back into individual distinct shapes. The APU cut out. Silence rushed back onto the flight line, heavy and ringing. The only sound was the ticking of the cooling metal and the heavy breathing of Captain Miller. Fred finished the checklist. Master switch off. He took a breath, unbuckled the harness, and opened the canopy. Colonel Vance stood at the bottom of the steps, waiting. Miller, sensing the danger had passed, tried to regain his authority. He stepped forward, his face red with embarrassment and rage. "Arrest him. I want him in cuffs. He endangered military property." "Shut your mouth, Captain," Vance said. The volume was low, but the tone was absolute zero. "One more word and you will be peeling potatoes in Leavenworth until you are as old as he is." Miller's jaw dropped. "But sir, he's a civilian." "He's not a civilian," Vance spat the words out. "He is Chief Warrant Officer 5 Fred Patterson, retired. And you just ordered him to start the machine he helped design." Miller froze. The name didn't mean anything to him, but the way the colonel said it made his blood run cold. Fred climbed down the steps. He hit the ground and dusted off his hands. He looked tired now, the adrenaline fading, leaving the aches of age to return. He walked past Miller without looking at him and stopped in front of the colonel. "She's got a vibration in the tail rotor, Colonel," Fred said matter-of-factly. "Pitch links are loose on the number 3 blade, and the number 2 engine is running 20 degrees hotter than it should at idle. Needs a compressor wash." Vance smiled, a genuine expression of relief and awe. "I'll have the maintenance crew on it within the hour, Chief. It's an honor to see you. I didn't know you were on base." "Just passing through for the reunion," Fred said. "This young man," Fred gestured vaguely toward Miller, "seemed to think I needed a refresher course." Miller looked at the ground, wishing a hole would open up and swallow him. Vance turned to Miller. "Captain, do you know who this is?" "No, sir," Miller whispered. "This is the man who wrote the tactical doctrine you failed to memorize last week," Vance said, his voice rising so the MPs and the other officers could hear. This is the man who flew the first Apache into combat in Panama. This is the man who held a hover in a box canyon in Iraq for 45 minutes under heavy fire to extract a pinned-down SEAL team, taking 30 rounds to the fuselage and still flying it home. They call him the Ghost Rider because nobody thought he could possibly be alive after what he did. Miller looked at Fred. He looked at the red leather jacket, the gray hair, the trembling hands. He saw the man now, not the age. He saw the eyes that had seen things Miller could only imagine in video games. Fred looked at Miller. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He just offered a quiet observation. "The machine doesn't care about your rank, son," Fred said. "It doesn't care how shiny your boots are or how loud you shout. It only cares if you respect it. And if you treat people like dirt, you'll treat the machine like dirt. And eventually she'll kill you for it." Fred turned back to the colonel. "I think I'll take that ride to the gate now, sir. My wife is waiting for me at the commissary." Vance shook his head. "No, Chief, you're not going to the gate. You're coming to the officers' club. First round is on the captain here. And then he's going to spend the next month washing every helicopter on this flight line with a toothbrush." Miller swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." Fred paused. He looked back at the Apache one last time. The blades were still now drooping slightly under their own weight. A flash of memory hit him. Not a war memory, but a memory of the day he retired. Walking away from the bird for the last time, thinking he would never feel that vibration again. Today he had felt it, and it was enough. He looked at Miller. "Check the pitch links, Captain. Don't let her fly until you do." "I will, sir," Miller said. His arrogance was gone, replaced by a shaken humility. "Thank you." Vance guided Fred toward the staff car. The MPs holstered their weapons. The crowd dispersed, leaving Miller standing alone in the heat, staring at the silent helicopter, realizing that he had just been schooled by a legend, and he was lucky to still have his wings. The drive to the officers' club was quiet at first. Colonel Vance watched Fred from the corner of his eye. "You still got the touch, Fred," Vance said. Fred rubbed his right hand, massaging the knuckles. "Took me a second to remember the APU sequence. They changed the panel layout on the block triz. You fooled everyone," Vance laughed. "You spun that rotor up smoother than my test pilots." Fred smiled, looking out the window at the passing barracks. "It's like riding a bicycle, Colonel, except the bicycle has 2,000 horsepower and is loaded with hellfires." They pulled up to the club. As Fred stepped out, a few older officers on the patio stood up. They recognized the walk. They recognized the face. A ripple of whispers went through the crowd. The ghost was back. Fred didn't want the attention. He just wanted a glass of iced tea and to sit in the air conditioning. But as he walked up the steps, a young major held the door open for him, standing tall, pressing himself against the frame to give Fred room. "After you, Chief," the major said with reverence. Fred nodded. "Thanks, son." Inside, the cool air hit him. He sat down at a booth. Vance ordered drinks. "You know," Vance said, leaning forward, "Miller is a good pilot. He's just..." Young Fred finished. "And scared. They act arrogant when they're scared they aren't good enough. I was the same way in '75. Vance raised an eyebrow. "I doubt that." "I was," Fred insisted, "until an old sergeant major chewed me out for disrespecting a mechanic. Taught me that the pilot is the least important part of the equation. The bird flies because of the crew, not the guy in the front seat. Miller will learn, or he won't, and he'll wash out." Vance nodded. "I'll make sure he learns." Later that evening, as the sun began to set, casting long orange shadows across the base, Fred walked back toward the parking lot. His wife Martha was waiting in their sedan. She rolled down the window as he approached. "You were gone a long time, Fred," she said. "Did you get lost?" "No," Fred said, opening the door and sinking into the soft fabric seat. "Just ran into some old friends. And I got to sit in the cockpit one more time." Martha looked at him, concerned. "You didn't try to fly it, did you? You know what the doctor said about your heart." "I didn't fly it, Martha," Fred lied gently. "Just warmed up the engine." He looked out the window as they drove toward the gate. They passed the flight line. In the distance, he could see a figure on a ladder, working on the tail rotor of the Apache under the glare of floodlights. It was Captain Miller, wrench in hand, checking the pitch links. Fred smiled. He closed his eyes and listened to the hum of the car engine, letting the day fade. He wasn't the hero of the base anymore. He was just Fred. But for 10 minutes, amidst the heat and the noise and the smell of jet fuel, he had been the Ghost Rider again, and the blades had sung for him one last time. The story of the day spread through the base like wildfire. By the next morning, every private and every general knew that Captain Miller had tried to haze Fred Patterson and had gotten the lesson of a lifetime. It became a cautionary tale, a legend that would be told in the barracks for years to come. But for Fred, it was just a moment, a reminder that while the body ages, the spirit and the skill never truly forgets. He had proven, not to the captain but to himself, that the fire still burned, and in the quiet respect of a salute from a colonel, he had found the closure he hadn't realized he was missing. If you enjoyed this story of veteran valor and instant karma, please hit that like button and share it with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the Veteran Valor channel for more stories of unassuming heroes who prove that true strength doesn't need to shout.